I'd like to start today's video with a story published in The Atlantic titled, "This is what life without retirement savings looks like." Here's a section I thought was particularly interesting. It reads, Roberta Gordon never thought she'd be alive at age 76. She definitely didn't think she'd still be working, but every Saturday she goes down to the local grocery store and hands out samples, earning $50 a day because she needs the money. Quote, "I'm a working woman again," end quote, she told me, in the common room of the senior apartment complex where she now lives, here in California's Inland Empire. Gordon has worked dozens of odd jobs throughout her life, as a house cleaner, a home health aide, a telemarketer, a librarian, a fundraiser, but at many times in her life, she didn't have a steady job that paid into Social Security. She didn't receive a pension, and she definitely wasn't making enough to put aside money for retirement. So now, at 76, she earned $915 a month through Social Security and through Social Security Income, or SSI, a program for low-income seniors. Her rent, which she has to cover solo since her roommate died in August, is $1,040 a month. She's been taking on credit card debt to cover the gap, and to pay for utilities, food, and other essentials. She often goes to a church food bank for supplies. And the article goes on. This is one of the sadder stories that I've read in a while, and I thought it would be worth some discussion. There is a crisis brewing in this country, and I think we can probably learn a lot from Roberta's story. Now, I don't personally know Roberta's background. She could have been much better off at one point in time and simply met with an unfortunate series of events. She could have been struggling her entire life, unable to find any disposable income to save. She could have also been a spendthrift, never setting aside any money for the future. The one thing that we can conclude for sure was that the amount of wealth that she had and has is insufficient to allow her to live comfortably without working in her old age. In other words, her lifetime savings was insufficient. Let's take a look at how we're doing savings-wise as a society in the U.S. Here's a graph of personal savings rate going all the way back to the late 1950s. This graph is brought to you courtesy of the St. Louis Federal Reserve. Before we discuss the trend, let's define what's meant here by personal savings rate. The savings rate as defined here is the percentage of personal income after taxes that is not spent on consumables such as food, utilities, housing, automobiles, and other things. The assumption is that whatever is left over goes into an account that will, at a minimum, preserve purchasing power, or possibly grow in purchasing power over time. This personal savings rate is an aggregate for society as a whole. Now, we can get into a long, drawn-out discussion regarding whether as a society we can save as a whole. After all, any financial security that serves as one person's asset is necessarily another person or organization's liability. But I'd like to defer that discussion for another day. The trend is the thing that is of interest for today's discussion. One can see that up until the early 1980s, the personal savings rate was between about 10 to 15%. Once the year 1982 was reached, the personal savings rate started a long-term decline until it bottomed at 2.5% in the late 2000s. It's somewhat interesting that the personal savings rate correlates fairly well with how the stock and real estate markets were performing at the time. Up until 1982, people had grown skeptical about the ability of financial markets to provide them with security, and so they saved more. By contrast, the years 1982 through the late 2000s were the years of what we might call the magic money machine, where all a person had to do was invest a little bit into stocks or real estate and then magically become wealthy over time. The point in time where confidence in the magic money machine was highest was also the point of lowest personal savings rate. After the financial crisis of 2009, people started saving more of their disposable income. I suppose that they came to realize that the magic money machines don't really exist. But then, the stock and real estate markets started taking off again as a result of Federal Reserve loose money policy, And the dream of the magic money machine recaptured the imagination of the average American. We are now back again to a personal savings rate of just 2.5%. Now, it might be that people just don't have the disposable money available to save, but I don't personally believe that. Judging from this chart, and also some things that I hear from people that I have had conversations with, the reason for such a low savings rate stems from the belief that the stock market and real estate money magic machines will continue to enrich them. But 2.5% is not enough, folks. Let's play a little math game and see why. I'm going to introduce some players to this game. The first player is an aggressive saver. This is a person who is very content with a modest lifestyle. He or she drives a modest car, lives in a modest home, doesn't eat out at restaurants much. The only expensive habit this person has, let's say, is a love of gold and silver coins. This habit results in a significant amount of take-home pay being spent on what others in society would consider to be a poor investment, because the gold and silver coins do not pay interest or dividends, and they don't have any retained earnings for growth. And this person is comfortable with that criticism. He or she doesn't trust the stock market and is more comfortable owning coins that can be sold later if need be. But as a result of this love for accumulating gold and silver coins, this person saves a huge percentage of after-tax income. Maybe 10% of the person's income is deferred into a 401k account, into a money market, and an additional 20% goes into gold and silver coin, who knows. The relative fractions aren't important here. The key is that this person is a very heavy saver. He or she saves 30% of after-tax income and just buys things that he or she believes will maintain purchasing power over the long term. Our second player is a modest saver. Just like our pre-magic money machine saver, this person saves 10% of his or her after-tax income. Again, this person is skeptical of stocks and real estate and just buys money market funds and bank CDs. Maybe a few treasury bills here and there, and maybe a little bit of gold and silver. This player assumes that there won't be any significant amount of financial long-term gain from these investment holdings. In other words, there will be no magic money machine. The rate of savings will be doing the heavy lifting. Now, our third player has bought into the magic money machine narrative and believes that only a very small portion of his or her income needs to be saved. The belief is that the stock market will provide a 10% per year after-tax return. With that belief, this person spends nearly all of his or her after-tax income and simply dreams of an effortless retirement once his or her stock investments take off. Unfortunately, over the long term, this investor learns a harsh lesson that magic money machines don't really exist, and he or she actually earns 5% after-tax rate of return, which is still quite a generous assumption, but let's be generous just to make a point. And just so that we're clear, we're talking about a 5% after-tax inflation-adjusted return, not a 5% after-tax nominal return. So the 5% rate of return after taxes really is quite a generous assumption. So let's see how our players fared over a 40-year working career. Here's a chart showing the outcome of our little math game. The blue line represents our aggressive saver. Every year, the aggressive saver sets aside 30% of his or her after-tax income. After 10 years, this person has saved up the equivalent of 3 years' worth of after-tax wealth. After 20 years, the person has accumulated 6 years' worth of after-tax wealth. And after 40 years, 12 years' worth of wealth have been accumulated. At retirement, this person is in quite a good position. But wait, you say, 12 years of after-tax income won't be nearly enough to last. Well, hold that thought. We'll get to that in a moment. Now, our moderate saver, shown as the black line, hasn't accumulated nearly as much wealth. This is no surprise. With only a third of the savings rate of our aggressive saver, it's natural to assume that only a third of the wealth will have been accumulated long term. And that's how the math works out. At the end of 40 years, this person only has 4 years' worth of after-tax income saved up in the form of wealth. Now, it's better than nothing to be sure, But this player will need to rely upon Social Security in retirement, which is not really a good position to be in. Our Invest in Hope player had a belief, shown as the red dashed curve, that at the end of the 40-year working career and investing career, his or her 2.5% savings rate would amass into a sizable fortune. If the dream of the magic money machine turned out to be reality, this person would have 11 years worth of income saved up in the stock market, which is just shy of what our aggressive saver had managed to accumulate. As an aside, wouldn't it be wonderful if the world worked this way? If only we could all save only 2.5% of our income and have it grow such that it was the equivalent of saving 30% of our income. What a wonderful world that would be. We could have our cake and eat it too. Unfortunately, for our Invest in Hope player, it turned out that the magic money machine only spit out a return of 5% per year after taxes. So after 40 years of working, mainly to fund a consumption lifestyle, what was left over was an account balance worth only about 3 years' worth of after-tax wealth. This player is likely facing a future similar to that of Roberta Gordon. But let's get back to the point that I raised a moment ago about the aggressive saver and how 12 years' worth of savings doesn't seem like that much. Now, it's true that 12 years isn't that much, though one might be able to count on some additional resources in retirement. Maybe Social Security will be paying some nominal amount to retirees in the future. Who knows? Anyway, we're not taking something very important into account here when we're looking at the amount of wealth our aggressive saver has amassed. It's true that wealth the equivalent of 12 years of after-tax income has been accumulated, but that 12 years of after-tax income will equate to many more years of living expense. And this is because our aggressive saver, who declined to save 30% of his or her take-home pay, has grown accustomed to living off only 70% of the take-home pay, not 100%. So the wealth accumulated will actually purchase more than 17 years worth of current lifestyle. So let's adjust the chart. Here's the result. Notice that the curves for our Invest in Hope player barely moved, but the lines for our savers moved in a material way. The black line for our Armada saver moved up about 10%, reflecting the fact that this person grew accustomed to spending only 90% of his or her take-home pay. But the blue line moved up quite significantly. Our aggressive saver is used to living on only 70% of his or her take-home pay, and so 12 years worth of take-home pay is worth about 17 years worth of lifestyle. Wealth equivalent at 17 years worth of lifestyle is about what it will take for the typical person to have a comfortable retirement without having to rely upon Social Security. This is because the average person can be expected to live into his or her early 80s. Now, I'd recommend everyone take a good hard look at this chart. It tells quite a powerful story. The financial industry has sold us a dream of magic money machines, and as a consequence, the working members of society are not saving nearly enough for the future. We'll discuss assets as liabilities in another video, but for now, just note that investment returns will not make up for an inadequate savings rate. A 10% savings rate reminiscent of the 60s and 70s is certainly better than the 2.5% that we see now. But a 30% savings rate is really what it will take if you want to not rely upon Social Security, as Roberta Gordon is doing now.